Prime Minister Mark Carney has just met with Canada's premiers, their fifth time in person since he became Prime Minister, but this one took on a new sense of urgency when the United States announced it would impose 50% tariffs next month on a whole range of Canadian exports. So I want to show you this exchange from the closing press conference between the CBC's Kate McKenna and the Prime Minister.
Do you think that this is a meaningful opportunity to approach some sort of endgame with the United States, or is it just another pressure tactic from the Trump administration?
It's both. First ministers, premiers, and myself, we've had a series of conversations on this, on what it means, what our priorities are, where we go from here. And I will say, give you two observations from that. One, we all recognize that the most important thing we can do is to continue to build this economy strong. And the second is to be united with respect to our strategy, our negotiating strategy, and our objectives. And part of that unity is recognizing that there isn't a series of little trade issues, they're broad trade issues. All of them have to be part of a comprehensive agreement.
Okay, time now for the Power Panel. Today, Supriya Dwivedi joins us. She was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Peter MacKay is a former Conservative cabinet minister, and Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. It's good to see you all from beautiful Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. Shachi, let's start with you. What's your assessment of what we heard today from the Prime Minister of how this countdown clock to 50% tariffs may just be the opportunity we've been waiting for? Who knows? What do you think of it all?
I think a lot of this, as it has been, is going to be not necessarily led or pressured, but low-key in background, maybe high-key in background, also guided by what Canadians are thinking about this. And there's a lot of unanswered questions. I think first and foremost, whether these latest salvos around the 50% tariffs are perceived as a significant worsening of the situation, because this time the president's going after CUSMA exempt items, or whether, you know, in midsummer, at the end of July, this represents for a majority of Canadians just here he goes again, will he back down again? So I think, first of all, we need to better understand the sense of alarm, because that is going to have a significant impact on the direction that government takes on this. Yes, are they going to continue to keep talking, keep doing the work? Of course, but at the same time, if there is a turn or a sense that, yeah, Canadian consumers may actually be open to taking on some of these U.S. products in their own markets that the Americans have been pushing for, or on the other side of that spectrum, on the other end of that spectrum, are they prepared to say, hell no, let's actually slap retaliatory tariffs on all of this and keep fighting, keep with the elbows up? So it sounds like a poll that needs to be fielded, and indeed is being fielded. But in the interim, you know, we got to figure out where Canadians' heads are at, because the Prime Minister is going to continue to say, you know, things like it's both things can be true at the same time. I say that a lot. He's saying it today because it's true. Yeah. Is it a pressure tactic? Yes. But here's the last question on this one. How much does anyone actually trust a deal that gets done to be abided by this White House? So, yeah, lots of things to figure out in the tossed salad of all of this.
Well, Peter, as we workshop the future polling of the Angus Reid Institute, how did you what the Prime Minister and others had to say today? Because they seem to think something could move in the next 27, 28 days. I don't know, because I truly do not know what to think about any of this anymore with the way that the administration south of the border operates. So what's your sense of what we heard?
Well, I think some of the expressions of optimism were a little over the top. I don't know if it's the water or the cow's ice cream over there, David. You tell me. But Scott Moe was perhaps a little more sanguine. I think, you know, statements like everything's on the table and we're in a better position than we were 18 months ago are rhetoric. But what else can the Prime Minister say at this point? And just picking up on Shachi's point, I think Canadians will, in fact, vote with their pocketbooks. They're whether, you know, we put American alcohol back on the shelves or not, I don't know a lot of Canadians that are going to rush out and buy American products writ large, given the current climate, unpredictability, and again, this, what can we expect from the American administration, even if we were to get a good deal tomorrow, which is highly unlikely. So there was, arguably more questions than answers that came out of this meeting. The unified approach, of course, that will continue until such time as you pointed out in your previous discussion with the Premier of Nunavut, until such time as some provinces, jurisdictions are going to be asked to do more than the others. And in this case, it's going to be Alberta and Quebec. It's going to be supply management. And do we try to leverage the Americans more on energy? That, of course, to mix metaphors, is going to be a self-inflicted wound and mutual assured destruction for both countries, which much of this entire scenario feels like these days.
Yeah, Supriya, there was a more detailed and robust discussion of things inside the meeting this morning. No phones. Nobody could have a phone. They reduced the roster of people who were allowed in there. It was supposed to be premiers +3. It became premiers +2. They really wanted to keep what was talked about tightly held. But from Danielle Smith to everyone else we spoke with, there was a confidence expressed. So I don't know if that is for the cameras or if that's really the state of play, but where do you think things are as the countdown clock ticks away?
Well, I mean, I'd like to hope and think that most of the premiers have a bit of a poker face once cameras are put in front of them, so don't necessarily wear everything that goes on behind closed doors. But yeah, look, I think, to Peter's point, I think a lot of what's being said with regards to the optimism and the confidence expressed is likely a little bit of rhetoric, right? Things that you kind of need to say in these situations. I think it's incredibly important for the premiers, though, as Peter pointed out, with different, provinces being hit rather, differently, particularly this time around, they'd be wise to keep whatever bickering they're going to have behind closed doors, right? Like certain provinces are going to be hit harder with the U.S. needing, energy and potash from us. It makes sense why Alberta and Saskatchewan are largely spared. But of course, if you're Ontario, you've kind of been wearing it on the chin a little bit. And if I'm the premier, if I'm Doug Ford, I'm probably telling Scott Moe and Danielle Smith to, voice their displeasure a little bit. Peter Hoekstra, the ambassador to the U.S., has mentioned his very good relationship with Premier Smith before. He refers to her as my good friend, Danielle Smith. So she's clearly got a few years in the administration. It, wouldn't hurt to be putting all hands on deck, so to say.
Right. Shachi, though, it's interesting. Like, united behind the Prime Minister, full confidence, let's go get a deal. Where you do see some disagreement, and not trying to turn it into something bigger than it is, but how do you respond if this doesn't work, right? All options are on the table, says the Prime Minister. Hit him with everything we've got, says Doug Ford. Don't make threats you're not prepared to make good on, says Danielle Smith, like cutting off energy if that means the end of Line 5 through Michigan, for example. Where do you see that? Because there is a consensus on getting behind the Prime Minister. There's not a consensus on if and how there's a retaliation should it be necessary.
No, and to an extent, we have seen some of this script before, because this isn't the first time we've faced this wave of Trump eruption before, for lack of a better phrase. So, we know the provinces, we know the premiers are going to do a round of we're all in this together. Where the premiers haven't been truly tested to this point is around those concessions. We always talk about the fact that, it's all united until Supriya talks about Ontario wearing it on the chin. I'm sitting here in British Columbia, where the lumber industry is suffering so badly. But at some point, which is a point that we haven't actually hit yet, because these things always start out looking like an incoming tsunami wave and end up looking like less of a ripple, in terms of the worst outcome than a skipped stone on a still lake. So we don't want the worst case scenario to play out, but the worst case scenario will absolutely involve winners and losers. And, if you're a premier, your domestic provincial politics are such that these types of crises with the rhetoric of Trump actually help distract from your own provincial woes. until the stuff actually hits the fan, in which case, you're going to see premiers, whether it's in front of cameras or behind closed doors, really sort of take on a sauve qui peut mentality, saying, well, hell no, not my industry, not my province's bread and butter, so to speak. So we're not there yet, and we don't know until it happens, and I hope it never happens.
Yes, nobody wants you to have to go to the worst case scenario option when dealing with a national economy. But look, one of the things I wanted to flag here is because we're getting more indication of just where the U.S. stands in trade talks coming from the White House. President Donald Trump's senior advisor on trade, a name people may remember, Peter Navarro, he had this to say about Canada to News Nation.
I can tell you that of all the people that I've dealt with on trade, Canada, love the people, but their negotiators, some of the most dishonest people I've ever met. They stab you in the back. They're doing stuff to us at the same time that they're inviting the Europeans in wide open to their market. So the president says, no, this is not cutting it.
Okay, so that's Peter Navarro. Peter MacKay, what do you make of that? Just more noise from south of the border, but if that's the prevailing consensus, I mean, the sort of unity and optimism, what does this tell us about sort of the cross-border dynamic?
Well, I'm tempted to use a very impolite comment, but I won't go there other than to say that it's hardly genuine to start throwing that kind of rhetoric around on the eve of serious talks, which are still unbelievably yet to get underway. I mean, I would point out to Peter Navarro that we have a free trade agreement, a comprehensive economic trade agreement with the European Union. Go figure. We're going to honor that agreement when dealing with the European Union. That type of example doesn't hold water. I mean, look, we have seen this and even worse from members of the Trump administration, which, sure, is it bravado? Is it an echo chamber of what's coming out of the White House? Sure, it is, but highly unhelpful. This is on the eve of sitting down face to face with people like our Ambassador Wiseman, like Janice Charette, like Dominic LeBlanc. And I know all of them. And they're all good people who are tasked with a very difficult job. But resorting to, playground name calling at this point is hardly professional. It's hardly going to move the dial for both countries. And I say again for emphasis, tariffs are harming both countries in substantial ways. And more importantly, drilling down, it's harming consumers inside both countries. It's harming state and provincial and territorial economies. It's having structural damage in relationships. And it's not in the interests of anyone to start this kind of infantile insulting of the very people that you're hoping to hammer out a deal with.
So, Priya, it's interesting when you look at that sort of just like name calling, I guess, for lack of a better word, by trade advisor Navarro, and you stack onto that what the trade representative, Jameson Greer, said yesterday to Katie Nicholson about these latest tariffs. He said, well, we tried to get Canada to drop the retaliatory tariffs, and they wouldn't, so we had to do this. Like, well, you know how you get retaliatory tariffs off. You stop the attack. And then complain that we were not grateful enough for the great access we had to the U.S. market, which is kind of the whole point of CUSMA. There's sort of grievance and gaslighting happening at the same time.
Yeah, and that's a great way to put it. That's exactly what's happening, and they're happening in parallel, and they're doing it at once, and Canadians shouldn't fall for it. I think what's interesting about all this is that, to Peter's point, the timing of this is, it'd be one thing if this was happening in the middle of like nothing was happening. Neither side was meeting. There was a huge stalemate and all this, and he's frustrated, so he's going off, shooting from the hip on live television. Okay, fine, but that's not what this is. You're setting up the negotiations in a way where you're kind of setting up to be acrimonious and adversarial, which isn't really coming to the table in good faith, and that's kind of the way the Americans have been throughout this entire time. And, it's worth noting that, Peter Navarro also had a piece in the National Post that's, quite detailed and quite substantive. And to be honest, a lot of his critiques in the piece, I don't know that a ton of, folks would necessarily viscerally disagree with, but I'm not sure why anyone would listen to this administration right now when they're going around, insulting the country, threatening to annex us while the president still continues to troll us by by, posting pictures of North America and placing the American flag where Canada's territory should be.
Yes, that big map you put out, and David Frum came out and said this map would just make Mark Carney the front runner for Democratic nominee for president in 2028, which was an interesting little shot
Because
back.
Hassan Piker is really going to back Carney, but yes, sure.
All right. Look, I want to show something else we got today. And that's some clarity from Prime Minister Mark Carney today about the cost of the latest concession to the United States, this one to get the Gordie Howe Bridge to open. The Prime Minister admitted that it made a mistake, didn't explain it well or properly, and initially saying interest costs and debt repayments would be deducted before sharing some of the net revenue with the United States over the first 15 years of the bridge operations. And today, the Prime Minister outlined how the U.S. will get its split.
The sharing of proceeds with the United States goes into economic development that would support traffic ultimately on the bridge. So there's an alignment of incentives. The combination of that agreement and the sharing under that, it is a very marginal impact on the overall economics. Okay, very marginal, because it takes time for traffic to ramp up. There's various costs. There's various sharing. It gets fed back in. And to put it in order of magnitude, it's less than 5% in present value of the overall cost of developing the bridge. So that's the overall what it is, what it isn't. And yeah, could I have explained it better on a Sunday morning at Stampede? Yeah, with a cowboy hat on? Yes, I could have explained it better.
Okay, I did some of my own math, but to make sure it was right, I followed up with the government to attach a dollar amount to that 5% figure the Prime Minister quoted. It's equal to a maximum of 5% of the cost of building the bridge. So the price tag for the bridge was $6.4 billion, which means the U.S. split under this side deal could be worth a maximum of $320 million over 15 years. That's an average of about $21 million a year to get the bridge open. I ran my math by the Prime Minister's office, and they said it was accurate. So, Shachi, at last, we have some more clarification. The details of the bridge were published. $21 million a year on average, $320 million maximum. There may be other factors that bring it down. What do you make of the clarification and the quantum?
Or take it up. And I understand when politicians managing massive national economies use the word marginal to describe, hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, I get it. The Economist is not necessarily wrong, but $320 million is going to sound like a lot of money to a lot of Canadians, and ask questions about, like, why this concession, wherefore, how did it come about, why did it happen? And I think it speaks to a broader issue here, which is in the resolve that Canadians have around not necessarily, pivoting or caving on the things that Trump wants or the things that his White House and negotiating teams are asking for. Despite that, what the antipathy also does is it masks criticism that may be fair of the way this government is handling the negotiations, handling the situation altogether. So when the Prime Minister says, yeah, I could have explained it better, it's symptomatic of a bigger issue, which is he really handling negotiations as well as he should be? Is he explaining it to Canadians as well as he should be? Or are we all still continued to be protected is the wrong word, but covered or blanketed by a raw sense of jingoism that pops back up and never really goes away every time the president does something like this. So it's good to be patriotic. I'm not criticizing the sentiment, but it does mask things that maybe this government and maybe this Prime Minister would not or should not be skating on otherwise.
Okay, so Peter, I take Shachi's point. Maybe it does mask something about this government, but it also reveals something about the other government, that no deal kind of matters. They'll leverage it, they get what they want, because this money is going to go into a regional economic development fund fully under the U.S. control, right? So this is straight to them as they figure out how to use it. Maybe it'll be used to boost traffic on the Gordie Howe Bridge. Maybe it's used to improve the Ambassador Bridge, which is something Howard Lutnick may want to do for the big donors down there. What do you make of this revelation that we've got?
Well, I think it's important that you did your job on this one, David, and pointed out what the actual costs, although that will fluctuate, as you mentioned. But this is not a great apology. I mean, this is a difference between a flapjack and a cow patty when you get right down to it. This is a pretty big deal that we've made this type of concession with really nothing in return. And as was pointed out recently by an American official, we're not going to get credit for it anyway. I think it was Jameson Greer who said, well, they tried to pull a fast one, and so they're not getting anything in our good books by doing it anyway. So look, I think it's part of the problem that this government has with the overall narrative. This prime minister was elected on, I'm going to get a deal. I can deal with Donald Trump. And thus far, not so much. We're better off than we were 18 months ago. This particular bridge, Canadian taxpayers have footed the bill, and now it's going to take longer to get that bridge paid off and longer to see a return on investment. So I don't know. I think that this was an unforced error. Whether he was out late the night before at the Stampede, I don't know. But it's not something that you can really fudge the numbers on. I know central bankers and car dealers are used to playing with other people's money, but this is taxpayers' money.
Okay, but so Priya, like the clarification on, admitting I could have explained it better, set that aside for a second. The dollar amount, the value, it's hundreds of billions of dollars go across this bridge, and the longer it's closed, the more it costs. So is it worth it, I guess is the question, right? Like, I had to assess, is that, because this was a bit of a shakedown, a lot of people see it as, was this worth paying to get the bridge to open?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's the unfortunate choice here, right? And it's like there's no good choice of like allowing the bridge to stay closed and be, shaken down by it and have the cost of that. But so, yeah, like I don't think $320 million that we weren't necessarily accounting for and that Canadian taxpayers are just kind of like paying into to go into an American controlled fund is the best sort of thing in terms of either substance or optics. But at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like there was a very good choice for the prime minister to make. I wish they had been much more forthcoming about the fact that there was no real good decision to make here, instead of making it sound like it was this, A++ of a deal that we got and that we were somehow master negotiators out of all of this. I think, we're all adults. And I think Canadians are okay to hear a truth along the lines of, yeah, this isn't the best, but what was the other alternative was way worse. So we went for the less worse option. And this is what gets it done.
Well, Shachi, that may be sort of the choices that Canada is facing just overall with the United States, right, as all of this goes forward, is the less worse option. And I just wonder if you think people see it that way, right? Because, this was a signed deal. This was a deal that this bridge just should have opened, and it should have been none of this drama and none of this extra cash and none of it. And it seemed like the Americans were just willing to let it sit there, not doing anything. And there's an economic cost to that as well as a real cost to it. More broadly, how do you think people will see all this?
I think they've had a lot of time to internalize the worse and worser aspect of all of this. Now, there's a couple of things. And again, we go back to you don't want the worst or the worser case scenario. But until such point that people are being, and it's already happening to many Canadians, so I'm not minimizing that. But until we see more Canadians saying, yeah, I've lost work. I've been sent home from the line on my shift. My retail job is lost. My manufacturing job is lost. Until we start to see this really directly and with a drawn line start to hit Canadians at their very core, and again, we don't want that. We're still in a place, in a phase where the emotional comes out, and 51st state talk, annexation talk, is so hard to come back from, and it's so hard to go from that to, well, on this particular issue, was government as canny, as shrewd, or as transparent, or as credible as it could have been? And, you know, the weight is still on one side of that column for the time being. It continues to be on that side of the column, which is we're going to give the government the benefit of the doubt. Now, will that shift? Again, let's see. Let's see what the next weeks bring. Let's see what the next month brings. Let's see what things are looking like on August 19th or in the run-up to that. But, you know, it's the latest twists and turns in a very painful telenovela.
But, you know, Peter, just on the trust question, as we come back to the material consequences of all of these choices and actions, this was a deal, the bridge deal, signed when Barack Obama was president, that the Trump administration would not honor or respect. Kuzma was a deal signed by the Donald Trump administration that Donald Trump would not honor or respect. And now we've got this 27-day sprint to try to get some other sort of deal. You know, to what end, maybe? I mean, how does a country trust a partner that is this manifestly unreliable again and again and again and keeps inflicting vandalism across the border on the economy?
Well, that is the quintessential question, isn't it, David? And it feels, and I'm not the first to use this expression, like an abusive relationship. That no matter what we try, no matter how we intend to deal with this, we can't leave, and we can't completely disconnect from the United States. And the problem, of course, is that the citizens on both sides of the border are being held hostage in many ways by this type of erratic, abusive behavior. And I do want to, reinforce what Shachi has said, that the corrosive impact on our economy that we're all feeling, that we're living through and suffering through and trying to make tough decisions that Canadians face daily, that is being felt on the other side of the border too. And it's sometimes easy to forget that. And, the stats don't tell the story. They really don't. And so we are sort of waiting in anticipation of changes in the composition of the Senate and the House, whether the U.S. courts are going to start playing a more intrusive role in some of this erratic behavior. But there is just massive uncertainty in all of it, not the least of which, what if we get a deal and 6 months after signing, it all begins again? Yep. That is also, a possibility. So waiting it out, being tough, elbows up, all of this, there's no guarantee. There is just simply no way to have a guarantee that we can go back to the days when people's signatures mattered on these agreements and that there was, to use your word, trust in the relationship.
Yeah, and value in it. And I emotionally and physically can't handle the end of a trade war and then the start of another one. We have about 40 seconds. Give the last word to you. Your thoughts on this before we say goodbye.
Yeah, look, I mean, I have been saying this from the jump, and so I'll just echo what Peter said, but I think it's quite right. Like, I don't know how our government is supposed to take any deal or anything that the White House says with any sort of degree of certainty, because they've shown that their word and their signature doesn't really mean much. So I think, increasingly Canadians are going to have to try and wrap our heads around the possible scenario that even if we get a deal, we may not have actual real certainty with respect to the economy for quite some time, unfortunately. And I don't mean to sound like a Debbie Downer. I know I am often the Debbie Downer on the panel, but it's just the way that this has sort of shaken out. And I think we need to be prepared and pragmatic about the way this administration operates.
I think we're all pretty depressed.
No,
Supriya.
Fair. Thanks, Sachi. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I'm positive it can always get worse. All right, we're going to leave it there. Shachi Kurl, Debbie Downer, Peter MacKay, Supriya Dwivedi, good to see you all. We'll talk again soon.